Jehovah's Witnesses, Faith or Control. Hello, dear listeners. Today we are going to discuss a very sensitive but necessary topic. It concerns the dangerous boundary between religious belief and organizational control. As you walk down the street, you may have seen two neatly dressed people holding magazines approach you saying, "We would like to share God's word with you." Their eyes seem sincere, their manner is polite, and their message is filled with hope. But what is the story hidden behind this? In today's world, it is becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish truth, even amid the flood of information. Particularly, organizational control disguised under the name of religion can subtly infringe upon individual conscience and freedom. This is not simply a personal matter. It can become a serious social problem where families are broken apart, society is divided, and sometimes even lives are put at risk. Through the organization called Jehovah's Witnesses, we will examine how religious beliefs can restrict individual freedom, destroy social relationships, and even cause legal disputes. This is not intended to defame a specific religion. Rather, it is to gain wisdom to distinguish between genuine faith and organizational control through healthy critical thinking. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, the very fact that we in the 21st century are still falling for the sweet temptations of organizations claiming absolute truth is nothing short of an irony of human nature. The psychological weakness of humans who find it difficult to endure uncertainty has become the soil in which such organizations can grow. Chapter 1. Legal Reality, Judgments Rendered by the World. Courts around the world have issued numerous judgments related to Jehovah's Witnesses. By examining these legal cases, we can clearly see the complex conflicts between religious freedom, individual rights, and social responsibility. In the case of South Korea, Jehovah's Witnesses have mainly attracted attention for two legal issues. First is the blood transfusion refusal issue. The Supreme Court recognizes an adult individual's right to refuse blood transfusions within the scope of religious freedom. However, the problem arises in cases of minors or patients without decision-making capacity. When parents refuse blood transfusions for their children based on their religious beliefs, the child's right to life conflicts with parental religious freedom. In fact, in 2019, there was a case at a hospital in Busan where parents who were Jehovah's Witnesses refused blood transfusion for their 10-year-old child suffering from leukemia, causing conflict with medical staff. Although blood transfusion was eventually performed through an emergency court order, the psychological pain the child experienced and the family conflict during this process must have been indescribable. Second is the conscientious objection to military service issue. For decades, Jehovah's Witnesses frequently went to prison for conscientious objection to military service, until the Constitutional Court decided to introduce an alternative service system in 2018. Hundreds of young people had to spend their youth in prison each year because of their religious beliefs. Many of them faced difficulties in employment and social life, even after release due to the stigma of being ex-convicts. The situation in Russia is even more extreme. In 2017, the Russian Supreme Court designated Jehovah's Witnesses as an extremist organization and banned them entirely. The reasons presented by the Russian government included promoting family breakdown, denying state authority, and threatening public order. Since then, over 150 prosecutions have occurred, and numerous believers have been imprisoned. Russia's case may seem extreme, but examining the background, it cannot be viewed simply as religious persecution. Russian authorities determined that Jehovah's Witnesses make believers abandon loyalty to the state and prioritize loyalty to the organization over family relationships. They also problematize the fact that believers are induced to refuse blood transfusions or avoid higher education. In European Union countries, financial exploitation and psychological control are primarily becoming legal issues. In Germany, France, Belgium, and other countries, lawsuits have been filed claiming that the Jehovah's Witnesses organization demands excessive donations from believers or pressures them to donate inherited property to the organization. Particularly in France, they regulate such religious organizations under the concept of mental manipulation. French courts have ruled illegal any behavior that systematically weakens individual judgment, blocks external information, and demands absolute obedience to the organization. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, looking at these legal battles shows how easily the noble value of religious freedom can be abused as a means for personal gain or organizational power expansion. True religious freedom should be exercised within limits that do not infringe upon others' freedom and rights, but in reality, these boundaries often become blurred. Chapter 2: Anatomy of the Organization: The Sophistication of Control Systems. When analyzing the structure of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization, one is amazed by its sophistication. This is not simply a religious group, but a meticulously designed system for controlling all aspects of individual life. The authority structure starts with a clear, vertical hierarchy. Jehovah God, the Watchtower Society, also called headquarters, local elders, and individual believers. In this structure, individual believers are at the bottom and must absolutely obey the decisions of higher organizations. The headquarters, called the Watchtower Society, is located in New York and dominates the lives of over 8 million believers worldwide. They have a supreme decision-making body called the governing body, consisting of 8 men, whose decisions are considered God's will and cannot be questioned by anyone. Local elders play the role of directly managing believers in each region's kingdom hall. They have the authority to monitor and guide everything from believers' personal problems to religious activities. When a believer acts contrary to the organization's teachings, the elders convene a judicial committee to decide on discipline. The language control system is also very sophisticated. Jehovah's Witnesses use special terminology different from language used in general society. Their exclusive language includes the truth, their teachings; apostate, someone who left the organization; worldly people, non-believers; new system, the new world after the end times, etc. This language control makes it difficult for believers to communicate with the outside world and traps them within the organization's internal thought system. Believers gradually find it difficult to understand the language and concepts of general society and can only think within the framework provided by the organization. Information control is even more thorough. Jehovah's Witnesses teach believers not to access worldly news, books, movies, internet content, etc. Particularly, information about other religions, philosophies, and scientific theories is defined as Satan's lies, and access is prohibited. Believers must only read publications issued by the Watchtower Society, mainly consisting of 2 magazines called The Watchtower and Awake. These publications present complex theological, philosophical, and scientific issues in extremely simplified ways, and claim that only the organization's interpretation is the sole truth. Social control mechanisms cannot be overlooked. Jehovah's Witnesses teach believers to avoid deep relationships with worldly people. Except for minimal workplace relationships, they are told to block interaction with non-believers as much as possible. This has the effect of isolating believers from various perspectives and information from the outside. As deep conversations with friends, colleagues, and even family become difficult, believers' social support systems become limited only to within the organization. Economic control is also an element that cannot be ignored. Jehovah's Witnesses teach believers to focus on evangelizing activities rather than formal education. University education is viewed as worldly wisdom and not recommended. Instead, they are told to work part-time and invest more time in evangelizing. This weakens believers' economic independence and increases their dependence on the organization. Economically vulnerable believers find it even more difficult to leave the organization and ultimately cannot escape from organizational control. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, the sophistication of these control systems reaches almost artistic levels. The technique of destroying individual free will while packaging it as God's love is comparable to modern marketing or political propaganda techniques. If one were to study the development history of control techniques using human psychological weaknesses, Jehovah's Witnesses would be an excellent case study. Chapter 3. Psychological Mechanisms. How people get trapped. Understanding the psychological mechanisms by which people become trapped in highly controlling organizations like Jehovah's Witnesses is very important. This is not simply a problem of foolish people, but relates to universal human psychological vulnerabilities. It starts with anxiety and uncertainty. Modern society causes many people to feel psychological anxiety due to rapid change and complexity. When economic instability, social conflict, and personal crises overlap, people come to crave certain answers and security. Jehovah's Witnesses approach people in just such psychological states. They present clear answers to all the world's problems and promise that all suffering will disappear in God's kingdom that is coming soon. Instead of complex and uncertain reality, they offer a simple and certain future. The need for belonging is also an important factor. Many people feel deep loneliness in the individualistic culture of modern society. Jehovah's Witnesses promise to become a true family to such people. People who initially show interest in the organization receive amazing attention and love from believers. This is called love bombing, a technique of intensively pouring affection and attention until the new person becomes completely dependent on the organization. They fall into the trap of gradual commitment. Jehovah's Witnesses do not demand everything from the beginning. First, they get people to participate in Bible study, then attend meetings, then participate in evangelizing activities. Each stage gives the feeling that this is the last time, but in reality, they gradually get deeper. In psychology, this is called the principle of consistency. People tend to maintain consistency once they make a decision. Small commitments accumulate until they eventually entrust their entire life to the organization. Resolution of cognitive dissonance is also an important psychological mechanism. Over time, believers discover contradictions between the organization's teachings and reality. For example, when the end is coming soon, but decades pass without it coming, or when scandals of leaders are revealed despite claims of a perfect organization. When such cognitive dissonance occurs, normally one should question the organization. However, people already deeply involved in the organization instead think, my faith is insufficient, or I need to work harder. They try to resolve cognitive dissonance by denying reality and further strengthening dependence on the organization. They also fall into the sunk cost fallacy. The more time, money, relationships, and social status invested in the organization, the more difficult it becomes to give up. Rather than accepting that everything I've devoted so far was in vain, they think, if I endure and persevere a little more, I'll be rewarded. Particularly in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, since there is a disfellowshipping system where leaving the organization means complete severance from family and friends, the sunk costs are even greater. The fear of possibly losing all human relationships, built over decades, becomes a powerful motive for staying in the organization. Obedience to authority is also an important factor. As shown in Stanley Milgram's famous experiments, humans have a tendency to obey the commands of authoritative figures to an amazing degree. Jehovah's Witnesses establish absolute authority by packaging their leadership as God's representatives. Believers are trained to prioritize the organization's decisions over their own conscience or judgment. Through the doctrine that individual thoughts are imperfect, but organizational decisions come from God, they fundamentally block critical thinking. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, these psychological mechanisms are not exclusive to religious organizations. The same techniques are used in political groups, multi-level marketing, and even some corporate cultures. Manipulation techniques using human psychological weaknesses have developed more commonly and sophisticatedly than we think. Perhaps modern society as a whole has become an experimental ground for such manipulation techniques. Chapter 4. Destruction of Family and Society. Examining the destructive effects of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization on individuals, families, and society reveals how frightening the consequences of religious extremism can be. Family breakdown scenarios typically proceed as follows. When one family member becomes a Jehovah's Witness, relationships with the rest of the family begin to change rapidly. The organization teaches believers that spiritual family, other believers, is more important than fleshly family. Let me give you a real example, the story of the Kim family living in Seoul. After the mother became a Jehovah's Witness, she began opposing her son's university admission. This was because of the organization's teaching that worldly higher education distances one from God. When the son said he wanted to enter medical school, the mother severed their relationship, saying he had succumbed to Satan's temptation. The daughter's case was even more serious. She was disfellowshipped by her mother for dating a non-believer boyfriend. The mother would not speak to her daughter, would not eat with her, and did not even visit when the daughter was hospitalized. This was because the organization taught that associating with apostates is disobedience to God. Child rights violations are also serious. Children raised in Jehovah's Witness families cannot participate in birthday parties, Christmas, or other worldly festivals. They must refuse to salute the flag at school and are excluded from activities like making birthday cards or Christmas cards. Such children feel alienated from their peer groups and fail to properly learn social skills. More seriously is the corporal punishment recommended by the organization. Jehovah's Witnesses teach that strong corporal punishment should be administered when children do not obey the organization's teachings. Denial of educational rights is also an important issue. Jehovah's Witnesses view higher education as worldly wisdom and do not recommend it. Particularly, philosophy, psychology, biology teaching evolution, and comparative religion are defined as dangerous studies that harm faith. Because of this, many young believers lose the opportunity to properly develop their potential. Even students with excellent academic performance give up university admission due to organizational pressure and focus only on evangelizing activities. This is not only a violation of individual human rights, but also a loss for society as a whole. Social integration hindrance effects cannot be ignored either. Jehovah's Witnesses prohibit believers from participating in politics, social service activities, and civic organizations. They teach not to be interested in solving real social problems, because only God's kingdom is the sole hope. This conflicts with the basic principles of democratic society. Citizens' interest and participation in social problems is the foundation of democracy, but Jehovah's Witnesses fundamentally block this. Election participation is also prohibited, so believers are deprived of opportunities to contribute to the development of the society they live in. Reduced economic contribution is also problematic. Since the organization opposes higher education and prioritizes evangelizing activities, many believers only work in low-skilled jobs. This not only limits individual economic capacity, but also results in lowering society's overall productivity and innovation capability. Mental health problems are also serious. The organization's strict control, perfectionist demands, and continuous surveillance system place severe stress on believers. Particularly, believers who question the organization's teachings but cannot express them experience severe internal conflict. Research shows that many former believers who left the organization suffer from depression, anxiety disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder. People suddenly freed from an environment where they were controlled for decades actually feel severe confusion and helplessness. Amplification of generational conflict is also a noteworthy problem. The younger generation, exposed to various information through the internet and social media, begins to question the organization's teachings. Meanwhile, the older generation has stronger loyalty to the organization, causing serious conflict within families. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, the very attempt to control people through information blocking in the 21st century information age is anachronistic. But what's more surprising is that such anachronistic methods still have some effect. This can be called a paradoxical phenomenon created by human irrationality and information overload in the internet age. Chapter 5: Information Control and Educational Suppression. Information is power, and the Jehovah's Witnesses organization operates a meticulous and systematic information control system to monopolize this power. This goes beyond simple religious guidelines to become an oppressive system that fundamentally blocks individual intellectual freedom and growth. The publication monopoly system starts here. Jehovah's Witnesses force believers to read only publications issued by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. The main publications, the Watchtower and Awake magazines, are translated and distributed in over 200 languages worldwide, but their content is written entirely from the organization's perspective. The characteristic of these publications is that they present complex theological, philosophical, and scientific topics in extremely simplified ways. Evolution, other religions, modern philosophy, psychology, etc., are unilaterally criticized and distortedly introduced. Opposing opinions or other perspectives are either not presented at all, or, when presented, are only dealt with as objects of ridicule and criticism. Prohibition of academic research is an even more serious problem. Believers cannot access scriptures of other religions, theological books, comparative religious studies, biblical criticism, etc. Even materials from other Christian denominations are prohibited as apostate. Majoring in religious studies or philosophy at university is virtually impossible. The organization teaches that such studies are Satan's tools and considers studying them sinful in itself. In fact, if a believer says they are majoring in religious studies at university, they can be referred to a judicial committee and disciplined. Scientific education distortion is also a serious problem. Jehovah's Witnesses strongly reject evolution and teach only creationism as the sole truth. But the problem is that they do not provide accurate information about evolution. The evolution presented in their publications is quite different from actual evolution in the scientific community. They frequently introduce already discarded old theories as if they were current evolution theory, or quote scientists' statements out of context and distort them. Internet usage restrictions are at the core of modern information control. The organization does not completely prohibit internet use by believers, but strongly recommends avoiding spiritually harmful content. This includes other religious sites, sites dealing with critical thinking, science education sites, and even news sites. Particularly, they tell believers never to visit sites criticizing Jehovah's Witnesses or sites containing testimonies of people who left the organization. They express this as apostate's poison and teach that just visiting such sites can spiritually contaminate a person. Suppression of critical thinking is the core of educational suppression. The organization teaches believers that independent thinking is dangerous, with the logic that individual understanding is imperfect, but organizational understanding comes from God, they fundamentally block individual judgment. Questioning itself is viewed as a sign of disobedience. Particularly, raising doubts about the organization's teachings is considered the beginning of apostasy and becomes subject to strong discipline. Believers are trained to put themselves under self-hypnosis, thinking, if I study and pray harder, I will understand, even when doubts arise. Language education restrictions are also noteworthy. The organization encourages believers to learn foreign languages, but only for the purpose of evangelizing activities. Language learning to understand other cultures' literature, philosophy, or religion is viewed as a waste of time. In fact, one believer in Korea spoke Japanese fluently, but was prohibited from reading Japanese literature or Buddhist scriptures. He could only read Japanese translations of Watchtower publications, and was also restricted from studying Japanese history or culture. Artistic education suppression is also serious. The organization teaches that worldly music, art, literature is morally harmful. Even classical music with religious backgrounds is prohibited as idolatry. In art, even Renaissance religious paintings are banned for viewing as Catholic idols. In literature, fantasy and science fiction genres are completely blocked as influence of evil spirits. Due to these restrictions, believers inevitably become alienated from humanity's great cultural heritage. Historical education distortion is also problematic. The organization has its own view of history and presents interpretations different from general world history or religious history. Particularly, Christian history is severely distorted in teaching, claiming that from the early church until their emergence in the late 19th century was the age of apostasy. Such education prevents believers from having proper knowledge about the development of human civilization or the history of religion. Historical facts are reinterpreted or omitted to fit the organization's doctrine, making it difficult to have a balanced historical understanding. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, the fact that such primitive information control still works in the 21st century information age is truly ironic. A system that blocks information available with one Google search and forces publications worse than Wikipedia to be considered truth still dominates 8 million people. This is a paradox of the information overload era and shows how easily humans can fall into intellectual laziness. Chapter 6. Medical and Life Rights Issues. The blood transfusion refusal policy of Jehovah's Witnesses goes beyond a simple matter of religious belief to raise serious medical ethics issues directly related to life. This is one of the representative dilemmas of modern society, where individual religious freedom, the right to life, and medical professionals' professional ethics are complexly intertwined. The basis for the blood transfusion refusal policy should be examined first. Jehovah's Witnesses prohibit blood transfusions based on several Old Testament verses. Leviticus 17:10 is representative. Any Israelite or any foreigner residing among them who eats blood, I will set my face against them and will cut them off from their people. But the problem is that this verse does not directly mention blood transfusion. The concept of blood transfusion, in the modern sense, did not exist when the Bible was written. The first successful blood transfusion was performed in 1818, and the modern blood transfusion system was established only in the 20th century. Most biblical scholars and medical experts view the biblical commandment, "Do not eat blood," as concerning religious rituals or food consumption, not medical procedures to save lives. In fact, other Christian denominations accept blood transfusions without any problem. The medical staff's dilemma is very serious. Doctors have a duty to save patients' lives according to the fundamental principle of the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. However, If an adult patient clearly refuses blood transfusion while conscious, there is also the ethical principle of respecting patient autonomy. Problems arise in emergency situations. When massive bleeding occurs during traffic accidents or surgery, the probability of patient death without blood transfusion is very high. In such situations, medical staff must make extremely difficult decisions about whether to respect the patient's religious beliefs or forcibly perform blood transfusion to save life. The minor problem is even more complex. When parents refuse blood transfusion for their children because they are Jehovah's Witnesses, the child's right to life conflicts with parental religious freedom. In most countries, courts intervene in such cases to decide on emergency measures, but precious time can be delayed during legal procedures. Limitations of alternative treatments are also problematic. Jehovah's Witnesses prefer bloodless treatment instead of blood transfusion. This includes iron supplements, blood stimulants, blood volume expanders, etc. Certainly, the effectiveness of bloodless treatment has improved considerably with advances in medical technology. However, limitations still exist. In cases of acute massive bleeding or severe anemia, it is often difficult to save life with bloodless treatment alone. Also, bloodless treatment generally costs more, takes longer treatment periods, and often has lower success rates. Psychological pressure and guilt are also problems that cannot be ignored. Jehovah's Witness patients often refuse blood transfusion due to pressure from the organization and family, even when they want to receive it. The organization teaches that believers who receive blood transfusion can be disfellowshipped, placing extreme psychological pressure on patients. According to one former believer's testimony, she wanted blood transfusion when massive bleeding occurred during childbirth, but refused due to pressure from her husband and elders. Fortunately, she saved her life, but the recovery period was prolonged and after effects were severe. She expressed regret, saying, "How good it would have been if I had received blood transfusion then." Organ transplant issues also show complex aspects. In the past, Jehovah's Witnesses also prohibited organ transplants, but currently leave it as a matter of individual conscience. However, since blood transfusion is often needed during organ transplant procedures, there are still practical restrictions. Medical staff education and response is also an important task. Many medical staff are not confident about how to treat Jehovah's Witness patients. Some think religious beliefs should be respected, while others think medical best practices should be pursued. Large hospitals are developing special protocols for Jehovah's Witness patients. They are strengthening research on bloodless treatment methods, establishing cooperation systems with legal teams, and conducting ethics education for medical staff. Social costs are also issues to consider. Bloodless treatment generally requires more medical resources, longer hospitalization periods, more expensive medications, and more medical staff time are invested. Who should bear these additional costs has also become a social controversy. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, taking ancient Middle Eastern religious texts as medical guidelines in the era of 21st century advanced medicine is truly ironic. Particularly, gambling with life in situations where even the interpretation is controversial is no different from gambling. But the bigger problem is that such individual choices can burden the entire medical system and affect treatment of other patients. Chapter 7. The Path to Escape and Recovery. Leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses organization is not simply a matter of changing religions. This is a massive change requiring reconstruction of one's entire life, and sometimes a painful choice of giving up all human relationships. However, many people are choosing this difficult path. And from their experiences, we can discover possibilities for recovery and growth. The beginning of awakening usually starts with small doubts. One former believer testified that Critical thinking developed after receiving university education prohibited by the organization. Another said, I began to question the organization's teachings when my child needed blood transfusion. The spread of the internet has greatly accelerated the awakening process. When they accidentally encounter apostate sites prohibited by the organization, they discover that perspectives different from the truth they knew exist. Particularly when accessing materials about the organization's history and doctrinal changes, they learn that what they were taught as unchanging truth had actually been continuously changing. Deepening internal conflict is the most painful stage in the awakening process. On one hand, doubts about the organization grow, but on the other hand, there is fear of possibly losing beliefs held for decades and all human relationships built within them. One defector testified, I couldn't sleep night after night. If the organization was wrong, what was my life up to now? Would I lose my parents and siblings? Would God really destroy me? Such thoughts continuously circled in their mind. In the information gathering and verification stage, they begin systematically exploring information outside the organization. They read materials from various fields such as biblical criticism, archaeology, religious history, and science, re-examining what they had learned. Many people come to exclaim, "So the world was this wide," during this process. They discover how sophisticated and evidence-rich the theory of evolution actually is, which the organization denounced as Satan's tool, and how deep and beautiful insights other religions contain. The decisive moment comes differently for each person. Some face it when witnessing hypocritical behavior of elders, others when learning about the organization's cover-up of child sexual abuse, and still others when family members' lives are in danger. One woman testified, when my daughter got leukemia and the doctor said blood transfusion was needed, but I refused due to the organization's teachings, and my daughter became critical, I suddenly came to my senses. It became clear whether I was really serving God or serving the organization. The reality of the departure process is more complex and painful than expected. There is no concept of resignation in Jehovah's Witnesses. To leave the organization, one must either be disfellowshipped through heresy trial or quietly disappear. The moment one officially expresses intention to leave, all believers must sever relationships with that person. This is called disfellowshipping, where no one greets the disfellowshipped person, eats with them, or has any interaction except minimal business necessary conversation. Difficulties in social reintegration can be greater than expected. People who have lived only within the organization for decades are not familiar with general society's customs or culture. Workplace human relationships, leisure activities, and even everyday events like birthday parties or Christmas feel unfamiliar. One defector recalled, when I received a birthday cake for the first time at over 40 years old, I was confused about how to react. They added, it also took time to realize that things I had previously considered sinful were actually no problem at all. The psychological recovery process is even more complex. Many defectors experience depression, anxiety disorders, identity confusion, etc. Having believed in absolute truth for decades, when that collapses, they fall into confusion, not knowing what to believe. Professional counselors explain this phenomenon with the concept of religious trauma syndrome. This is a special form of psychological after-effects experienced by people who escape from highly controlling religious environments. This shows different characteristics from general depression or anxiety disorders, and often requires professional treatment. Forming new relationships is also an important task. People who lost all existing human relationships when leaving the organization must build completely new social networks. However, having been restricted from interaction with worldly people for a long time, They often don't know how to make friends and develop relationships. The joy of intellectual growth is one of the most positive aspects of the recovery process. Being able to freely explore knowledge that was long prohibited, many defectors experience amazing intellectual growth. They enter university, develop new hobbies, or come to enjoy art and literature. One defector said, "When I properly studied evolution for the first time at over 50 years old, I was moved by its sophistication and beauty. I realized that what the organization called demonic were actually among the most precious of humanity's intellectual heritage." The importance of social support systems is also emphasized. Support groups for Jehovah's Witnesses defectors are active worldwide. They provide various forms of support, including online communities, counseling services, legal support, and financial help. In Korea, organizations like Cult Damage Countermeasures Alliance and Religious Damage Family Solidarity are active, with professional counselors and lawyers providing help. The mere existence of such support systems provides great help to people contemplating leaving. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, the fact that such complex processes are required to leave a religion in the 21st century shows how limited religious freedom can be. True religious freedom should include not only the freedom to believe, but also the freedom not to believe and the freedom to change to other beliefs. But in reality, such freedom is often not guaranteed. Chapter 8. Social Response and Prevention. The problem of highly controlling religious organizations like Jehovah's Witnesses is a task that society as a whole must address beyond the individual level. A comprehensive approach is needed to protect individual basic rights while guaranteeing religious freedom, and particularly to protect vulnerable groups such as children and adolescents. The role of education is most important. Education that develops critical thinking is the most effective way to prevent religious extremism. Schools should go beyond simply transmitting knowledge to develop students' ability to compare and analyze various information and make independent judgments. Particularly in religious education, various religions and thoughts should be objectively introduced, and the characteristics and dangers of religious extremism should be taught. It is necessary to specifically analyze and show the logical fallacies and psychological manipulation techniques of organizations claiming absolute truth. One high school in Korea has time in religion and society classes to objectively analyze cases of various religious organizations, including Jehovah's Witnesses. Students develop the ability to distinguish between healthy religions and problematic organizations while conducting comparative research on each organization's doctrine, organizational structure, and social impact. Media responsibility is also very important. The press must maintain a balanced perspective when dealing with religion-related issues. Rather than unconditionally criticizing or defending specific religions, they should provide objective reporting based on facts. Particularly when legal disputes or social controversies related to Jehovah's Witnesses occur, the media should report in a direction that explores the essence of problems and solutions rather than simply highlighting conflicts. They should also help general citizens understand the problems of such organizations through defectors' testimonies and expert analyses. Legal system improvement is also necessary. Korea's current legal system broadly guarantees religious freedom, but standards for when religious rights conflict with other basic rights remain ambiguous in many areas. Legal supplementation is particularly needed in terms of protecting children's rights. When parents refuse medical treatment for their children or restrict their right to education for religious reasons, clearer and more prompt legal procedures are needed to protect children's basic rights. Also, ensuring financial transparency of religious organizations is an important task. Transparent disclosure and external auditing should be conducted on how donations received from believers are used. Currently, many religious organizations receive tax benefits while being hardly monitored for financial management. Medical community response should also be systematic. Medical staff should learn appropriate medical ethical approaches when treating Jehovah's Witness patients. They should seek ways to provide the best medical services while respecting patients' religious beliefs. Large hospitals should strengthen research on bloodless treatment methods and secure related equipment and professional personnel. At the same time, they should establish systems to quickly proceed with legal procedures in emergency situations. Expansion of counseling and support systems is urgent. Currently, professional counseling services for religious trauma or defectors from extremist religious organizations are very insufficient. Professional counselors who understand these people's special psychological states and needs should be trained, and related support programs should be developed. Programs to help defectors reintegrate into society are also needed. Comprehensive rehabilitation programs should be prepared, including job training, educational opportunities, and support for forming social relationships. Interreligious dialogue and cooperation is also an important direction. Healthy religions should step forward to clarify differences from extremist and controlling organizations and show what true religious values are. It would be meaningful for various religious leaders to jointly announce an anti-religious extremism declaration and present common principles guaranteeing believers' freedom and dignity. International cooperation is also necessary. Since organizations like Jehovah's Witnesses operate across borders, there are limitations to national-level responses alone. Other countries' cases, such as the European Union's mental manipulation prevention laws or Russia's extremist religion regulation policies, should be studied, and international cooperation systems should be established. Expansion of preventive education is most important. It is much more effective to prevent people from falling into extremist religious organizations in the first place than to rescue them after they have already fallen in. Regular religious extremism prevention education should be conducted in schools, workplaces, and communities, and general citizens should be educated to detect warning signs early. Warning signs such as absolute truth claims, blocking external information, organization over family, and prohibition of critical thinking should be widely known. Family education and support are also needed. When one family member falls into an extremist religious organization, education and support are needed on how the rest of the family should respond. Rather than hasty confrontation, it is important to attempt dialogue with patience and seek professional help. Campaigns for social awareness improvement are also necessary. General citizens should be educated to recognize the dangers of religious extremism and not have prejudices against victims. It should be understood that victims of extremist religious organizations are not foolish people, but victims of sophisticated psychological manipulation. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, the fact that such primitive forms of mental control still work in 21st century democratic society shows the limitations of modern civilization. Technology has advanced, but human psychological vulnerability remains, and the techniques of manipulators exploiting those gaps have also developed. Perhaps we live in an era that needs a new form of religious literacy movement. Chapter 9. The Meaning of True Faith. As we examine the problems of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization, we naturally ask, what then is true faith? How can we distinguish between healthy religion and problematic organizations? Finding answers to these questions is very important, not only for individual spiritual growth, but also for the healthy development of society as a whole. The first characteristic of true faith is freedom. Healthy religion respects individual conscience and freedom of choice. Faith cannot be forced or manipulated, but must come from individual genuine conviction. True religious communities give members freedom to express various opinions and guarantee the right to raise questions. In contrast, organizations like Jehovah's Witnesses demand absolute obedience. They consider raising questions itself sinful and prohibit exploring other perspectives. This is not true faith, but blind faith, far from healthy religious attitudes. The second characteristic is love and inclusion. True religion recognizes human dignity and embraces people with different backgrounds and beliefs. It values family relationships and human bonds, and does not reject people because of religious differences. One Protestant pastor said, "True God's love cannot be exclusive. If God loves all humans, we cannot hate or reject someone just because their religion is different." Actually, healthy religious communities dialogue and cooperate with other religious people and work together for common good. The third characteristic is intellectual integrity. True faith does not consider ignorance a virtue. Rather, it believes that one should fully utilize the reason and spirit of inquiry given by God to pursue truth. It does not fear scientific discoveries or academic research, and believes that faith can deepen through new knowledge. The fourth characteristic is social responsibility. Healthy religion does not pursue only individual salvation. It takes interest in society's problems and strives for justice and peace. It helps poor people, speaks up for the oppressed, and participates in humanity's common tasks like environmental protection. The dedication of many religious people like Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., and Desmond Tutu to social justice can be called manifestations of true religious spirit. They did not become absorbed only in individual salvation, but worked for all humans' dignity and welfare. The fifth characteristic is humility. True believers do not claim that they or their organization are perfect. They acknowledge human limitations and accept that they can make mistakes. Therefore, they pursue continuous reflection and improvement and maintain an attitude of learning from others. Pope Francis has publicly apologized several times for the Catholic Church's past wrongs. He honestly acknowledged mistakes and promised improvements regarding the Crusades, Inquisition, child sexual abuse cover-ups, etc. Such humble attitudes represent true religious leadership. Methods to distinguish healthy religion from problematic organizations can be summarized as follows. Healthy religion welcomes questions. Problematic organizations prohibit questions. Healthy religion recognizes diversity. Problematic organizations force uniformity. Healthy religion supports individual growth. Problematic organizations encourage dependency. Healthy religion pursues transparency. Problematic organizations maintain secrecy. Healthy religion communicates with society. Problematic organizations encourage isolation. Healthy religion leads with love. Problematic organizations control with fear. The role of religion in modern society should also be newly defined. 21st century religion should shed its past authoritarian appearance and change to a more democratic and open form. It should peacefully coexist with other religions and thoughts in pluralistic society and contribute to solving humanity's common tasks. Religion should provide meaning and comfort to individuals while providing moral guidance and spiritual values to society. However, such roles should be accomplished through persuasion and example, not through coercion or manipulation. A new approach is needed for individual spiritual growth. True spiritual growth comes not from blind obedience, but from deep reflection and continuous exploration. One should not fear having doubts, and should maintain an attitude of learning from various wisdom traditions. Religious traditions should be cherished, but not blindly believed, and efforts should be made to harmonize them with modern knowledge. One should pursue personal salvation and social responsibility in balance, and lead a mature religious life where faith and reason are harmonized. To add a somewhat cynical perspective here, the fact that what humanity has pursued for thousands of years through religion, love, justice, peace, truth, has still not been fully realized may show religion's limitations. But at the same time, we can find hope in humans' continuing pursuit of these ideals without giving up. Perhaps perfect religion does not exist, but efforts toward better religion should continue. Conclusion. For an awakened life. The journey we have taken together, examining the problems of religious extremism and organizational control through the organization called Jehovah's Witnesses, is now coming to an end. I would like to organize what we have discovered and share wisdom about how we should live going forward. Through legal cases, we saw how religious freedom and individual basic rights can conflict. From Russia's extreme prohibition measures to Korea's conscientious objection, controversies, and Europe's financial exploitation lawsuits, we confirmed that the whole world recognizes and responds to this organization's problems. Analyzing the organization's sophisticated control system, we realized how human psychological weaknesses can be exploited. Techniques such as authority structures, language control, information blocking, and social isolation systematically weaken individual free will and create absolute dependence on the organization. Particularly, problems of family breakdown and social integration hindrance show the harm such organizations cause to society as a whole beyond the individual level. Children's deprivation of educational rights, amplification of generational conflicts, and refusal to participate in society are serious problems that shake the foundations of democratic society. Medical problems represented by blood transfusion refusal clearly show the ethical dilemma that arises when religious beliefs conflict with the right to life. Endangering life through arbitrary interpretation of ancient religious texts in the era of 21st century advanced medicine clearly reveals the dangers of religious extremism. But we do not despair. Many people are courageously leaving the organization and starting new lives, and society as a whole is raising awareness of such problems and seeking countermeasures. Through the power of education, improvement of legal systems, and expansion of social support systems, we can create a better future. The most important message all these stories throw at us is that we must stay awake. Religious extremism is not something happening in distant countries, but a reality occurring around us. Our neighbors, our families, and even ourselves can become targets of such manipulation and control. Therefore, we must always maintain critical thinking. When someone claiming absolute truth appears, when we meet an organization saying it has all the answers, when we encounter leaders demanding don't question, we should be wary. We must especially protect those in vulnerable situations. People struggling with economic difficulties, family problems, health issues, etc., become major targets of such organizations. If there are such people around us, we should provide warm interest and help, so they don't fall for extremist organizations' temptations. The 21st century is the age of information. Knowledge and information once monopolized by a few are now easily accessible to anyone. This is both a tremendous opportunity and responsibility. We must maintain balanced perspectives by utilizing various information sources. We should not blindly believe only one perspective, but should examine and compare from multiple angles. Particularly with information related to religion or ideology, we should approach more carefully. At the same time, we have the responsibility to widely share correct information. If family or friends show interest in extremist religious organizations, we should provide appropriate information and advice. However, rather than coercive or confrontational methods, it is important to dialogue with patience. The fundamental solution lies in education. Developing critical thinking from an early age, understanding various perspectives, and cultivating the ability to make independent judgments is the most effective prevention. Parents should help their children develop the habit of asking why. They should teach not to believe unconditionally just because an authoritative person said it, but always to find evidence and listen to other opinions. They should help develop courage to challenge without fearing mistakes and humility, to acknowledge and learn when wrong. Schools and society should also work hard on such education. Beyond simply transmitting knowledge, they should help students develop the ability to think and judge for themselves. In religious education particularly, various religions and thoughts should be objectively introduced, and methods to distinguish between healthy religion and problematic organizations should be taught. Individual efforts are important, but community roles cannot be overlooked. Healthy religious communities, civil society organizations, educational institutions, and media must work together to prevent and respond to religious extremism. Particularly, the role of religious leaders is important. They should show what true religious values are and clarify differences from extremist and controlling organizations. Through interreligious dialogue and cooperation, they should promote mutual understanding and work for common good. Media should also raise general citizens' awareness through responsible reporting. Rather than sensational or biased reporting, they should report from balanced perspectives to understand the essence of problems and seek solutions. Even while facing all these dark realities, we must not lose hope. Humans are certainly weak and imperfect beings, but they also have amazing ability to learn and grow. Looking back at history, humanity has continuously fought against ignorance and superstition, oppression and control. Sometimes there were setbacks, but overall we have been moving toward a freer and more humane world. The same is true in the realm of religion. We are developing from past authoritarian and oppressive religion to freer and more inclusive religion. Organizations like Jehovah's Witnesses are anachronistic relics going against such historical trends. Due to information age development, rising education levels, and spreading human rights consciousness, such organizations' influence will gradually weaken. However, until they completely disappear, we must not let our guard down. New forms of manipulation and control may emerge, and existing organizations may change tactics to suit the times. Therefore, we must always stay awake and continuously learn and grow. I also recommend that each of you listening to this audiobook take time for personal reflection. Am I blindly obeying some absolute authority? Have I sufficiently examined what I believe? Do I have the courage to look from other perspectives? Such questions may feel uncomfortable, but such discomfort is the beginning of growth. Only when we leave existing comfort zones and explore new possibilities can we achieve true freedom and maturity. I also ask you to show interest in family and friends around you. Is anyone in danger of falling for extremist organizations' temptations in difficult situations? Is there anyone who needs warm interest and help? Small interest and care might save someone's life. Finally, to add a cynical perspective, the fact that humanity is still vulnerable to such primitive forms of mental control in the 21st century may show our civilization's limitations. But at the same time, recognizing and trying to solve such problems proves human greatness. We may not be able to create a perfect world, but efforts toward a better world must and will continue. In closing, dear listeners, we have completed a long and difficult journey together. Through the organization called Jehovah's Witnesses, we examined the dangers of religious extremism and organizational control, and thought about what true faith and healthy religion are. The core of all this discussion is ultimately human dignity and freedom. No organization, no leader, and not even any religion has the right to infringe upon individual conscience and freedom. True truth is not forced, but freely accepted, and genuine love does not control, but liberates. John 8:32 in the Bible says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." True truth does not bind people, but liberates them. If any teaching or organization does not make you freer, please question whether it is really truth. Also, remember the wisdom of Matthew 7:16. By their fruit, you will recognize them. No matter how good their words, if the result is family breakdown, hindrance of individual growth, and social conflict, it is not a good tree. Finally, please engrave in your hearts the words of Ephesians 4:15, speaking the truth in love. The pursuit of truth and practice of love cannot be separated. True truth always leads to love, and genuine love always pursues truth. I sincerely hope that you will live freer and more loving lives based on the wisdom and insights gained through this audiobook. And I hope you will share such freedom and love with difficult neighbors around you. I express deep gratitude to everyone who shared this precious time together. I respect your open minds and longing for truth as you listened to the end. If you want more beneficial content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Your precious opinions and encouragement become the driving force for creating better content. Thank you.